Okay, now we're recording again. And this is video number 12, I think, if I'm counting correctly.
Sounds right.
It should be. I have difficulty with math. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We've been talking mainly about domestic policy in the United States and Joe Biden's domestic policy. We do have an earlier video on Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan, something which is supposed to be completely finished by the 11th of September of this year. We talked about that. And so in a way, what we'll be doing today, this video is in a way a continuation of that, but instead of looking just at one place and the possible repercussions of a decision by Biden, we're going to try to take in his entire, or the main elements of his foreign policy, because this is something we haven't dealt with before. And I mean, there's two sides to American politics and two sides to being the American president. And that is being leader of the country, dealing with domestic issues, trying to get through infrastructure reforms and things like that. But then there is foreign policy and how you as president, excuse me, decide to act as not only leader of America, but leader of the free world. So we'll see what we come up with. But I'll turn things over to Anders. I'm going to ask you, what is Joe Biden's foreign policy as you see it, as it's starting to play out now? And basically, what do you think about it?
At its most basic, it seems to be to pull troops from basically all over the world and redeploy them against China. And I mean, it's a mixed bag. It's good and it's bad at the same time, because one of the things he's basically doing by default is pulling troops out of active war zones and places where they're liable to get engaged in like combat activities, and that's good. Like less rounds fired is a better world, but at the same time, this realignment and the shift against like a new Cold War against China, that's a bad thing if you ask me. But at the same time, as you said to me before we started recording, like China isn't blameless in this either. Like I'm not really like convinced that it's an entirely bad thing in every single case. Like, for example, there's going to be a confrontation between the US and China over Taiwan, for example. But I don't feel like I believe in self-determination, like 100%. And I don't think China has any right to bully Taiwan either. So if redeploying US troops there in order to like create a cold war instead of like China just invading and annexing Taiwan, if that's what's going to happen, then yeah, sure, I'll find a way to live with that, I guess. What do you think?
Yeah, no, as you said, I think the danger, I think, is creating this a new Cold War. And this is something which was very much a part of Biden's background, and he was an active participant in the Cold War. And it also leads to another, I'll come back to that, but another question is why does the United States, I'm asking myself, always have to have an enemy? How to define itself? And it was the Soviet Union, was the East versus West, it was radical Islam, and now it's China. There always has to be some sort of counterpart, something you're fighting against in order to define yourself. But I think there's, as I followed this more, and just in the past few weeks, I think there's definitely a real danger of another Cold War, because America, I mean, as Joe Biden said, America is back again. And it was a bit unclear what he meant at that time, especially when he had John Kerry, who's sort of a dove. He served in Vietnam, but then was a critic of Vietnam, sending him to Paris. But I think Joe Biden, my opinion, definitely wants America. He sees America as it should be the leading country in the world. America is best. And I mean, there's a lot of good things about America, but when you say your country is better than any other, and there's an enemy that we have to prevent from getting powerful, even if it means using military means, because this is, like you said, this is why they're shifting military resources away from something like Afghanistan, which is just swallowing billions of dollars, to where it can be used, as they hope, more effectively in the China Sea. And of course, it's all, to prevent China from doing something. But I think there's a real danger of dividing, of the world finding itself in this Manichaean good versus evil sort of division. Something I was going to mention later on, but maybe I won't have a chance. My option to that would be, and this is, I think, relevant for Sweden and for myself living here in Sweden, I would like to see, well, I would like to see America do this, but it's not going to happen, a strengthening of the realigned nations, because, as you say, I mean, they've sort of fallen out of view, but every nation should have the right to self-determination, going back to Woodrow Wilson. So the non-aligned countries, I think, can really, I think they need to really get together, especially in Africa and in South America, because there needs to be something else in the world, because it's now China, the United States, and Russia is in there as well. There needs to be a counterbalancing force, and also to make sure the nuclear weapons are never used. They're supposed to be illegal, but of course, the United States, the nuclear powers, haven't signed on to it. Okay, I've been going on a bit too long, but I think the real danger of this is that you build up this sense of confrontation. And okay, the United States didn't go to war with the Soviet Union. We came pretty close in Cuba. And yeah, what's going on in the South China Sea? I mean, there's other ways of dealing with that. And I would hope that the regional actors would act more independently of the United States and China, and form their own, again, countervailing body, as it were, so one could deal with these crises, because there are crises. Obviously, China's expanding. I'm not being naive about that, but it's how you meet that challenge. So I don't know. I've gone off and different.
No, but I think you're absolutely right. Like this kind of problem should be solved politically and not militarily. And also all of these countries with like great power ambitions need to take a step back and just reevaluate what they're actually doing with themselves, because it's stupid. And none of this has a military solution. Like one of the things that people bring up in regards to China, for example, and the need to act against China is the Uyghur situation in Xinjiang.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not going to be solved militarily. That's just a fact, because we're not going to invade China and occupy Xinjiang. And it's the same thing with Taiwan as well. Like if China wants to reunite and like annex what they consider part of China, they need to come to terms with the fact that they're not going to be able to do this militarily.
No.
They've stated that if they can't find a peaceful way to annex Taiwan, they're going to do it by force. But that's just bluster and empty posturing. It's not going to happen. Not as long as the US has a single soldier station there. So, like, what's the point of this? It's all like in the case of the US, it's a way to justify the appropriations process and a way to defend spending $1.7 trillion on the F-35 and defend building more carriers and stuff like that. And in the case of China, it's a way to distract people from criticizing the political process within the country.
Right.
Just direct opinion against a foreign threat or build up like some nationalist fervor or something. So it's used for different purposes when you're talking about the US and China, but it's equally stupid. And like you said, like the nightmare scenario is that we end up with a situation where there is some sort of confrontation and conflict and things get out of hand and somebody presses the button or something and we have a nuclear war. That's the worst case scenario. Exactly. I don't think
we haven't been close. So yeah.
Exactly, like nobody's really interested in that.
No,
but at the same time, during the last Cold War, we had like more close calls than I think most people realize.
Exactly.
Just systems malfunctions and like misunderstood satellite images and like dumb bluster, almost getting out of hand, and it's a bad thing. Like, the risk of something happening is quite small, but if something happens, it's like without a doubt the worst disaster the world has ever seen. So
exactly,
you might want to try to avoid it.
Yeah. No, I think it's really a real danger. I'm looking in my notes and of course can't find. What is the, this also has to do with, it's this convention that was signed to make the use of nuclear weapons illegal, which has been signed by a lot of countries, but not the nuclear powers. It was one of the big things that ICAN, that got the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago, who's actually headed by a Swede, which I think is nice. But it was one of the big policy pushes that said it is actually illegal to use nuclear weapons. Would America or China or somebody else use them? Yes, but still it's something, I think it's important. We tend to, and speaking of myself, tend to forget the fact that there is a nuclear threat. And there was a seminar in America last week. It was headed by Daniel Ellsberg, the famous anti-nuclear campaigner and publisher of the Pentagon Papers. It's horrifying things he was talking about from when he was working in the government. And you only need to listen to one of those speeches and you think this is, you don't want to think about it, but there is this possibility that mistakes can happen. And the more, like you say, the more you ratchet up the bluster, then the easier it is for something wrong to happen. And that's a problem, I think, personally with Joe Biden. I mean, we've seen him the way he behaves in a town hall meeting on the campaign trail. And also, I mean, the way, I guess he thinks he's trying to be tough, like when he calls Putin a murderer, and then he's very aggressive towards his Chinese host. And again, no, I'm not naive. I know what China's doing and with the Muslim minority, but that this sort of, and then the other guy does the same thing back again. And then pretty soon you're in a situation that neither can back down. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. No, no.
No, I was just gonna say it's funny you bring up Daniel Ellsberg, because I think it's he who actually made the point that if you have nuclear weapons, you're actually using them like constantly. It's a constant threat against your neighbors, and it's I mean, it's if you find yourself in some kind of hostile relationship with a nuclear power, then you're gonna have to assume that they might use them, and it's completely unconscionable. Like nobody should have to live under threat of the nuclear attack. No person in the world should have to deal with that, basically. And especially when you consider that stuff might actually go wrong. The decision to launch might not be made on completely irrational grounds. That's really scary. So I think like some kind of non-aligned nation push against nuclear armaments might be like a rallying factor, especially if this thing develops into like a new Cold War. Then I think there might be like quite a strong opinion for some sort of concerted action against nuclear armaments. Hopefully, at least. But then again, it's like when you're discussing these things, it's important to remember, like you also said, that this isn't a question of good or evil. More often than not, it's a question of two bullies misbehaving, as in the case of the US and China when it comes to foreign policy. And that's another thing that's important to keep in mind if this thing ratchets up, because like there's already tons and tons of China panic here in Sweden, and most of it's justified. But it's important to remember that we can't like rely on the US stepping in and handling the problem. Because A, it's not possible, and two, other people are gonna be negatively affected by it. So it's like some kind of political solution, some more concerted efforts to deal with the problem, like internationally between countries. That's the way forward, I think. And I also want to say to anyone listening, if you hear military jets in the background, it might be Joe Biden scrambling fighter jets against Daniel. I'm not sure.
I'm feeling very exposed. The military maneuvers in my backyard. Well, Air Force maneuvers. It's who knows? So they're everywhere. Now, I think one thing, which no, you're right. There has to be international sort of pushback. And I think one good thing, one difference between now, because basically Joe Biden, who's of a certain age, and okay, I'm there too, but his mindset is very much in the post-war period. America was the biggest power, competing against, and the Soviet Union was a big threat and so forth. America was dominant militarily, economically, everything else is not economically anymore. The world has changed, and you have all sorts of different countries and regions, and it's a much more complicated world. And because a good thing, it's also a bad thing too, because I don't think Joe Biden understands that. He's trying to force the world back into this mold. And you're either for us or against us, which is just like the war on terror, George W. Bush. If you criticize us and what we're doing in Afghanistan or in torture sites and stuff, then you're actually part of the problem. And but he's trying to reinforce that mold. I mean, the good thing is that I don't think the world can really be put back into that mold. And my hopes are that when Joe Biden talks about the allies, I love it when, again, okay, pet peeve, but when an American leader, if Clinton or Bush or Biden, are allies, it's like we're all equal. No, the allies do what we tell you to do, and otherwise you're not an ally. But again, the world situation is much more complicated, and even allies. If you go to the China region, you have something called the Quad, which is India, the United States, Japan, and Australia. And this is something which has been dormant for many years, but Biden wants to reactivate it, bring it to life again. Our allies, we're going to work together. You will do what I say, and we will contain China. That's what it's all about. Another laughable thing about that is that India is one of the democracies that he appeals to, and I think could be some debate to what extent there's a formal democracy, but I think Muslims living in the country or in Kashmir might disagree. But again, trying to bring back to life these things, and of course NATO is still there, but even here, Europe, different ideas, different points of view. And I think that's one of the redeeming features of this, that maybe Biden wants to put us back into this Cold War, good or evil dichotomy, but the world is more complicated. The problem is the United States and the Soviet and Russia and China have nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Well, regarding India, like Modi seems to be having real problems at the moment.
Exactly.
So maybe in a couple of years, things will look up for India. But yeah, like this thing about allies, like it's a complete sham designed to make it look like America has some kind of support in the world for invading other countries and bullying smaller states and stuff like that. But when you look closer at these alliances, like for example, like the Philippines and the US have a mutual defense agreement, and it's kind of to see what the point is there. Like, it's not that the US is under threat of being invaded and
no.
need the Philippines to come to their aid.
Mhm.
It's all basically an excuse to be able to direct force against China if need be.
Right.
And that's another thing. Like, America needs to be called out on that stuff. I remember during the Second Gulf War when people made fun of the coalition of the willing, which basically included the United States and like a handful of
Yeah.
smaller states sending 10 soldiers or something,
Mhm.
probably trained and armed by the US, and paid for. And it's just like a PR sham. There's
Yeah.
no like popular support
No.
behind it, and like that's like the fundamental question is all of these things need to be democratically rooted. These decisions. Most ordinary people don't have any thirst for like empire, like most Americans don't,
No.
and
Yeah.
almost nobody who doesn't work in the security state or the military has any interest in war. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this
No.
confrontation, like great power games and Cold Wars and stuff.
Mm.
And if the US is serious about being like a bastion of democracy, maybe they should start listening to what people actually want. And that brings us back to like the F-35 program, for example, which cost $1.7 trillion, or it's gonna cost $1.7 trillion over its lifetime. That's the same price tag as like the COVID rescue plan, for
Right.
example. I think if you ask people what they actually want, then it's going to be hard to justify that kind of military spending.
Yeah.
And if you bring down military spending, then it's going to be easier to stop this kind of like arms race and posturing and like imperial and great power bluster.
Do you think Joe Biden's going to do that? Is he going to reduce the military
No, I
budget?
don't think so.
No.
I don't think so, because that's one of the problems with the American presidency as well, that the president has way too much power when it comes to foreign policy. And especially since George Bush Jr., the president basically has total power when it comes to especially starting wars and stuff. It's
Well, there's something
I don't know. It's
War Powers Act that Biden was actually instrumental in getting passed. It was during the Vietnam War when power shifted too much to the executive branch, and the president was doing basically what he liked. In Congress, this thing about the two of the three branches, they sort of, vie with each other for power. And sometimes Congress is more powerful. It's been a long time. And usually was, especially since FDR, the president is, but it went too far. So the War Powers Act was supposed to restrain a president. In actual practice, to what extent this has happened is debatable. But as you say, the president is also commander in chief of the armed forces. And the idea there was to have civilian control of the armed forces. It gives the president an awful lot of, well, just like the airstrike that he launched against the Iraqi militia across the border in Syria, that he just, gives the order. There was no War Powers Act or anything. And then it was in violation of international law. And I think we mentioned this in our first video, but he just said, no. And so there's way too much power there, but behind the scenes, so the president has an awful lot of power, but then there's something that used to be called the military industrial complex, but now is broadened to include, it becomes a blob. Maybe you could,
blob.
Yeah, what is that blob? What are the different components? And why are these people or agencies so important in formulating foreign policy? And who votes for them?
Well, I mean, it's basically a conglomeration of the security state and the military. And who votes for them? Nobody, really.
Oh.
It's basically like a business interest combined with traditional like bureaucratic like nationalism, I guess you could call it. It's a bunch of people who first and foremost looks to the security interests of the state and consider the security of the state their like primary concern. And it's also like it has basically like melded together with the military industrial complex. So there's a bunch of business interests there as well. And this is like, you can see this quite clearly when you look at the appropriations process and like the way that military equipment is ordered and manufactured. Just like the fact that like the F-35, for example, parts of it are manufactured in basically every state of the Union, which almost makes it impossible for any politician on the national level to oppose it, because it's going to cost jobs. If you cancel the program, it's going to cost a bunch of jobs. So it's all about money, and it's all about power, and there's no democratic control over it at all, which is what's scary, because what you end up with. Sorry if I'm going on.
No, go ahead. No, I was just
on here, but like I want to bring up the example of the war in Yemen, for example. The US has basically been at war with Yemen for 5 years, like in collaboration with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And I mean, if you ask ordinary people on the street, they might not even be aware of this fact. And if you ask them why the US is waging like basically a genocidal war against Yemen, I don't think you're going to find a lot of people who can answer that question. And then the question becomes like, why are they doing this? It's a way to keep Saudi Arabia happy and to be able to continue selling them weapons. And this has nothing to do with the interest of the American people or even the safety of the United States. And it's completely monstrous and unconscionable. Like early in the war, like for the first year of the war in Yemen, I tracked the casualty figures, and like that's depressing enough. But the worst thing is, after like a year or so of blockade and fighting, they basically like stopped updating casualty figures. They stopped at like 40,000 dead children, and now, like a couple of years later, who knows how many have died? These are like innocent civilians, and this is when I'm like cautiously positive to America withdrawing from the Middle East. This is basically the reason, because the US has withdrawn troops from Saudi Arabia. It's withdrawn support from offensive operations. Who knows what that really means? But it's clear that they're taking a step back, and I think the less US involvement you have in that kind of illegal war, the less risk it is of something similar being triggered again in the future, which is a good thing. And maybe we can even get like that fabled negotiated solution to the war in Yemen, instead of Saudi Arabia trying to like exterminate the entire population. So it's like
it's a Saudi-led war, and then also it's Iran versus Saudi Arabia.
This great power stuff. Yeah, well, the Houthis are usually painted as like Saudi proxies, Iranian proxies, but it's not really that simple. I mean, it's a domestic political movement, but they're certainly allied with Iran. But then again, I don't see how that is like Joe Biden's problem. Like if anything, that's a problem the Yemenis have to deal with. That's another like regional great power trying to exert influence over smaller neighbors. And there is no military solution to that kind of thing. It's going to have to be negotiated. And step one is peace process, and then people like trying to get along. So I'm positive to the US withdrawing from there. I'm positive to the US withdrawing from Iraq. They have like 2,500 troops left in Iraq, and those need to go. Like the only place I'm
are they
sorry, go ahead. Excuse me?
Are they being are troops being withdrawn from Iraq?
Yeah, there's an agreement between the Iraqi government and the US to withdraw the last 2,500 troops. I mean, it's if it's going to happen or not depends on you have like different forces pushing in different directions. Iranian-backed militias are basically like performing non-stop rocket attacks against US bases to incentivize them leaving, to not have to deal with that kind of stuff. Then on the other hand, you have the question if the Iraqi government can actually provide for their own security needs. But in the long run, I mean, it's basically the same situation as with Afghanistan in the end. Like if Iraq can't deal with their own problems, then how long are you going to stay there? You're going to stay forever. At some point, you're going to have to leave. And now is as good a time as any, I would say.
I'm not quite as optimistic as you are. I mean, yes, the United States is withdrawing troops, that is soldiers on the ground from Afghanistan, although we still haven't seen what's going to happen, the results of that. If we take into account the recent bombing outside of a girls' school, I mean, it's not inconceivable that Biden might have to change his mind. But that's another issue. But I mean, obviously the United States is withdrawing troops from different areas, especially Afghanistan is the main place, to save money, to redeploy them more usefully somewhere else. But the presence there is still maintained. There are, at last count, I think 15,000 so-called contractors in Afghanistan. And there will be, although, and again, this whole military industrial intelligence so-called complex, obviously there's going to be an influx of CIA officers, and there's going to be top-rate surveillance equipment, blah, blah, blah. So troops are leaving, but the United States is still there. And this is the problem I have with the Biden policy. Iraq has been going on longer, the withdrawal. So we were down to a manageable minimum, and conceivably can do certainly without American troops there. But I'm sure, and they already have a very well-developed surveillance intelligence operations there. But all these things, these are to advance American power, and they have nothing to do with the actual civilian population, which you mentioned. I mean, the very scary thing and horrible thing in Yemen, which has been called by the United Nations the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, and that's really going somewhat. But one of the key features in Biden's past, which is very problematic, which several people pointed to, sometimes he's against a war, sometimes he's for it, and then against it. So he has different positions. But it's always been, and you could say this is natural, he's American president, it's always been from the perspective of American strategic interests. So for example, Afghanistan, he's never mentioned the several 100,000 people who've died there. In fact, he hasn't really mentioned the number of American soldiers, young men and women who have died there. But there's a pattern, some people will say, looking at Biden's career, that in all these occasions, there's been a lot of armed conflicts, armed intervention by the United States, that the human cost doesn't really, these things happen. Maybe he's made a change in Yemen, but the problem there is, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I happened to read an article about Biden's initiative that they thought actually increased the fighting. It seemed to be a very ill-advised step. He recognized he took the Hutus off the, probably pronounced it wrong, off the terrorist list. It was sort of a concession to Iran. But since he doesn't know anything, and his team, the United States State Department, doesn't really know anything about this part of the world, they actually increase the fighting. Now, the only way you're going to have, as you say, you need to have a peaceful solution. Why not? And of course, this is not going to happen. Why doesn't the United States put pressure on Saudi Arabia, which has already killed an American journalist in the Turkish embassy, or the embassy in Turkey? No criticism. Why not? You say that they're not going to support the Saudi military, but nothing has really happened. I mean, the United States has the power, certainly, to say to Saudi Arabia, okay, this is horrible. We have to have a peace deal. This is leading nowhere. No one is no one is winning. So why not that instead?
I think they are putting pressure on Saudi Arabia, and like behind the scenes, obviously, but they've sent some signals in public as well. Like, for example, going public and saying that they're not going to support offensive operations. That's a signal that they disapprove, even if only mildly, of the war in Yemen. And also, I'm fairly certain that like 2 years ago, the UAE withdrew most of their troops from Yemen. That's also probably US. And when it comes to the increased fighting, like if Saudi Arabia or the UAE or the United States just like withdraws completely unilaterally from Yemen, from the war, then sure, it might lead to increased fighting. But at the same time, staying in the war, if all parties stay in the war, it's in the end, it's just going to keep things going. It's going to be a never-ending conflict until like everybody in Yemen is dead, I guess. So I think
it's a parallel with Afghanistan, because obviously
exactly
the decision to remove troops, it wasn't for the benefit of the Afghan population. Sorry, that's my opinion. But very bad things can happen. But I mean, nobody thinks that. I mean, the Afghan government is so-called military is in no position to rule the country, and things can get very, very bad. But again, staying there for another 20 years isn't the solution. But this is also why when we talked about Afghanistan before, we pointed to the not only the benefit but almost the necessity that you have a regional involvement in preserving and preserving the peace in Afghanistan. You need something in the case of Yemen as well, but other actors have to get involved. But I mean, that's very easy to say, and that the Yemen situation is much more complicated and complex. But no, as you say, just withdrawing, the fighting is going to continue anyway, but there has to be a peace initiative coming somewhere.
There has to be a political process. That's the only reasonable solution. And like when it comes to the US stationing troops abroad, I think like if there is popular support within the country where the troops are stationed, and the United States is invited, then I mean that's a completely different matter. Like for example in Syria, where the US provides the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, with like air cover, and they're basically they have like 900 soldiers or something acting as basically human shields for the Syrian Democratic Forces. Like I'm fine with that. That's a completely different thing. But when it comes to taking part in wars on behalf of like thoroughly undemocratic regimes, like the Saudi government, for example, then they need to just stop doing it, because nothing good is going to come from it, I think. And like the important thing to keep in mind is the answer in all of these cases, as with the confrontation between China and the US. The real solution is always some kind of negotiated political solution.
Right.
Like, that's the bottom line, I think. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of money on that. So.
No, again, it comes back to the military. Did you know? I found this out recently. Maybe you knew it, but there's this famous farewell address, if you like, that Eisenhower made to Congress when he left office. You can find it online, where he warned about the military industrial complex and the power that it had. This was in the 1950s, and he was a former general. But originally he had written, he wanted to warn about the military industrial congressional complex. And somebody said to one of his advisors that, you're going to be speaking to Congress, maybe you want to delete that. But I mean, he was right, because
that's
congressmen who also not only ideologically, but also in terms of, lobby and getting money from donors, from Lockheed and others. I think it's really difficult for people. I find it difficult to understand how intricately interlocked this whole military industrial complex is in the economic life of America in terms of employees, in terms of investments. As you say, you know, if we cancel this military investment, then jobs are going to be lost in Pennsylvania. If we cancel this or we cut down on that, jobs are going to be lost. And it makes it really, really difficult to extricate. I mean, for say a president who wanted to do that, to try to extricate or get out of this situation, because it's just so, it's like it is, you know, people, you know, in 2008 talked about the power of General Motors, and if it failed, you know, then the whole economy would collapse. And that's why Obama decided to support it financially. But General Motors is nothing compared to this. And it's in automobiles as well. It's everywhere in the American economy. How do you, and again, as you say, nobody elected these people. These were appointed by the president. And then you have these links, again, the money that comes to political parties and candidates and all the rest of it. How do you solve a situation like that? I'll let you solve it.
Okay, thank you.
I need some.
No, I think, like, first of all, you need some kind of democratic control. And like a good first step would be just reminding people in charge that you're not supposed to engage in acts of war without congressional approval.
Yeah.
And then I guess, like you said, it's a huge part of the U.S. economy. It's $1 trillion every year, and you need to replace those jobs with something, I guess. And the good news is, like, if you can afford $1 trillion in government spending on weapons programs every year, and like healthcare for soldiers and transportation and stuff like that, then if you stop doing that, then you can probably put $1 trillion towards civilian infrastructure and research and healthcare and other kinds of jobs. So, like, basically, it's a question of replacing those jobs with something more worthwhile. But I mean, on paper, that makes all kinds of sense. But the question is how you actually do it. Like, a lot of people are making tons and tons of money off of the current system, and like short of increased democratic control over the process, I can't see any real solution, to be honest.
No, it's really difficult. Again, it sounds good on paper, and we can decide these things now, and then Bernie Sanders can enact them when he's president. But I mean, it's just really, you know, where do you start? But maybe, I think maybe you hinted at it. You start on the periphery and make going to war impossible, or at least very, very difficult. And this, not just the nuclear thing, but just to make sure that armed conflicts don't take place. But I mean, we had 2 wars in the Gulf, we had Afghanistan, all these things get started, but that doesn't detract from the argument. So that's a very important thing to do, to make sure that people don't let these things happen. And if you have slightly lesser use of the military, then you're going to need less money, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this is enormously long-term, but I guess, I mean, a very good starting point for various reasons would be to ensure one way or the other that America doesn't get involved in these harebrained ventures. Unfortunately, I think Biden's policy is going in another direction, but that's another thing. But I mean, that it's a responsibility for the people to again, it sounds very weak, try to prevent. I mean, what happened, you know, there were protests throughout the world against invading Iraq the second time. And look what happened.
Yeah, well, it's it all comes back to the question of democracy. Like, if this was a democratically controlled process, then I don't think we'd have this problem at all.
No.
Because, like, as I said, ordinary people aren't terribly interested in this stuff. Like,
No.
sure, there are like hardcore nationalists who
Mm.
get like self-esteem from living in a country that dominates other countries, but those
Um,
people are fairly few, I think. People that particular like,
yeah.
personality. But I mean, if you look at it, it shouldn't be a hard thing to sell, really.
No.
Like increased democratic control, and also if you look at the fact that these weapons programs that are basically like economic stimulus, but towards something that's completely unproductive.
Yeah.
Uh, like
Ex-
they don't, the military doesn't produce anything.
No.
Uh, really. So
No.
if you offered people like increased control over their lives and say universal health care, then
No.
and say just explain that if we stop sending like carrier groups to the South China Sea, then
No.
you won't even have to pay more taxes.
No.
Like the case is easy to make, but the problem is like the political structure
Right.
of the country.
Mm.
It's almost impossible to do in practice, and that's like if that's the case, then I think you have to look at the political structure,
Yeah.
and the answer is probably like stuff that I've thrown out like from time to time, like getting rid of the Senate, for example. Just not just the filibuster, but getting rid of the
Getting rid of
Senate.
the whole
But now
Senate.
we're talking like, yeah, I mean, it's not impossible to do. Like you can rewrite the constitution. The problem
Yeah.
is it's such a radical shift
Yeah.
that it's almost like, I mean, this is what I'd want, but it's almost impossible. And also it's pointless to discuss because it's not going to happen near term anyway. So.
No, there's some things that could happen. Again, following up on what you said, is to increase government oversight. You need to have a president who somebody like an FDR type of person uh, uh, to increase democratic oversight. I mean, there's supposed to be democratic oversight, but there isn't, of course. But to either strengthen um, the the methods that are in place or to create new ones. You say we have to bring this under democratic control. Again, easier said than done, but it is something that can be done. And making the very arguments which that you put forward. And these are the things that people, making it something every day. You don't pay, you don't have to increase your taxes, or for example, if 53% of the federal budget goes to military. What if 53% of the budget went to healthcare?
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't we be having any debates about what type of healthcare or Obamacare and Medicare? So, but one can make these, and politicians who really want to make a difference, candidates who want to make a difference, can make these arguments to people that address their everyday working and family lives. And so it's not impossible, but I think it probably has to start on that level. And then with those, there are politicians in Washington who want to have a change as well. Not all of them are Lindsey Graham, but I mean they're and as soon as you start, I mean, it's also like we've moved forward, or more to the left now than we thought with Biden in the first 100 days. Nobody thought that would happen. Okay, this is another magnitude of a problem, but I mean, just because we say it hasn't happened, I mean, if you start something like it was like a civil rights movement, or you start arguing for change and taking steps and boycotting your local whatever, it's like green, not, instead of investing in fossil fuels, you should invest in wind power or something. So you can have movements like that when it comes to bringing the military industrial intelligence blob under control. It's not impossible to do, I think.
No, absolutely, and like I don't want to sound hopeless. Like, of course, you should try,
Mm.
even though it's a problem that seems basically insurmountable. it isn't. Like anything is possible. Long term, anything is possible, and on the other hand, nothing is ever going to happen. Nothing is going to change if you don't start working for
Right.
change.
Yeah.
So of course people should like, and a good first step is like candidates outside the political mainstream, like Bernie Sanders, for example,
Oh, yeah.
who actually questions the priorities and says like, maybe it's a bad idea to spend this amount of this exorbitant amount of money on defense when we don't actually have any enemies threatening the United States. Maybe we should spend this money more productively. And like if enough people make the case, then all of a sudden you have a conversation.
Exactly.
And that's the first step towards changing it, I guess. So, but it feels way off. And before we get there, we're gonna have at least like a decade of Cold War with China, the US and China squaring off.
Yeah. Again, I set my hopes to the regional actors who are the allies being a bit more independently minded. And I mean, like Japan, South Korea, Australia is very worried. I mean, the Australian government is now, even Kevin Rudd says, oh, this is good. The Americans are going to protect us. If there's a nuclear war, it's going to be in Australia. It's not going to be in the United States. No, but there is genuine concern by people in Australia that this is going to lead to war. You know, they're drawn into Vietnam. And that was also people forget this, or maybe not entirely aware, but that was a war to contain China. And there are military maps showing this. This is why America was in Vietnam. Well, how did that work out? You know, so this you have really a long history. This thing. So you have the Soviet Union, of course, but containing China has been a very important issue for American foreign policy, as long as Joe Biden has been influencing foreign policy in the Senate and also now as president. But I'm hoping that, you know, like South Korea and Japan and Taiwan, they talk together and say, okay, this is what the Americans are doing. This is what China is doing. Now, how can we work together to diffuse the situation? Oh yes, we're the best allies of America, but you know, how can we work together? And the same thing, and it's starting in Europe as well. Even though the EU is as a foreign policy body, leaves a lot to like about that. But other countries, and especially I think that the emerging nations, and COVID has set this back so far, but African countries and South American countries can play an enormously important role as non-aligned countries in the future. But again, I mean, COVID has devastated the economies and in these countries. But that's where I set my hopes, together with things like domestically, people like Bernie Sanders and others pointing out the ridiculousness of this and showing that there's other ways. We can still have a military, but we can have healthcare. We can have a green economy. We can cut greenhouse gases even more than 50%. Yeah, those are my thoughts anyway on it.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. Like in the end, the only thing that's going to be able to curb U.S. Imperial policy is United States citizens voting. That's that's the only thing in the end. And I think most people want that, but like we said, someone needs to start the conversation, start questioning priorities and stuff. And the press has a huge role in this as well, like,
True.
media. And,
yeah,
they need to step up and take some.
The media hasn't said all that.
They're doing.
Sorry, no, the media hasn't said that much, have they?
Absolutely. Like once again, I don't want to like harp on about Yemen, but Like the media should probably follow that more closely, to be
Oh,
honest.
that has definitely been ignored. I mean,
Yeah,
totally.
they've done a really bad job, and um, I mean it's a huge problem if people are dying all over the world as a result of your policy. Then you like
Yeah,
the people deserve to know about that.
yeah,
They need to see where the money goes.
yeah. So say the UN calls it the worst humanitarian crisis uh, in the world today. And there's other places one can choose as well, but this is worse in a smaller population, in a very young population, in a
Yep.
very small place. No, it's yeah, more attention should be focused on it. And again, with the media, I know we're talking about the established media, corporate media, CNN, MSNBC, and MSNBC I haven't looked at for ages for various reasons. But I do follow CNN. But they're so positive about Joe Biden and the domestic thing and the fact that he's not Donald Trump. And I think even there on domestic things, they might be giving him a free pass, but he has been doing things. But I mean, the danger is that on foreign policy, they do the same thing. And but because this really needs to be examined critically, you know, what's actually going on, and not just leaving Afghanistan, but this whole China policy. Let's look into that a bit more. And what are the repercussions? And are we going to war again?
Yeah.
But I see nothing in the established media, but
No, and especially since most of Joe Biden's foreign policy is basically like a continuation of Trump's foreign policy. Like most of it is like constant conflict and antagonism against China
right,
and pulling out of forever war
right, exactly.
conflicts.
Yeah.
Like Trump got yelled at by basically everyone when he tried to pull out of Syria,
Right.
and like basically every effort he made to pull out of different countries was painted as like irresponsible and stupid, and people were upset because he was like going too hard at China. Joe Biden does basically the same thing,
Yeah.
but nobody's yelling at Joe Biden.
No,
And in large part, it's probably, like you say, because he's not Donald Trump. It's
exactly.
much easier to yell at Trump than
Right.
Joe Biden.
Now he can get away with it. No, I was actually very surprised when early in his presidency, or even on the campaign trail, but mainly when he was elected president, that he was repeating the same thing about China.
Yep.
I thought there would be some, you know, a slightly different foreign policy approach. And I think, who knows, Obama might have been a bit different. But that's going back a bit. But again, Obama did the Iran deal and everything. But I thought there would be a slight difference. But there's a number of carryovers from Trump to Biden, and of course even earlier. But it's interesting. But yeah, Trump did everything wrong. But if Biden does it, well, okay, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
So, um,
I think
how long have we been talking?
about an hour.
About an hour.
I just want to say quickly, we haven't gotten to the Iran deal yet.
No, yeah, go ahead.
We should just mention that
Yeah,
it
definitely.
seems like there's some kind of settlement being reached. There's intense talks going on between Iran and the other participants of the nuclear deal, and they are talking with the US. It's kind of funny, the US isn't invited to the negotiations because they're not part of the deal anymore since Trump pulled out.
And of course.
But I mean, I assume they have like a computer with Zoom set up in the meeting room or something.
Yeah.
But there's negotiations going on, and it seems like the US is about to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal,
Yeah.
which is a good thing.
Yes, it is not impossible. And I'm trying to remember his name. He's an Iranian Swedish scholar, I think. I read something by him last fall, during the campaign. And he was again talking about what might happen, and of course the need to get into the to the deal with Iran again, just like the Paris Climate Accord. And he said, don't be distracted by. He didn't use the term political theater, but don't be distracted by the posturing. If Iran's going to say this, the United States is going to say that, and everything. It says, don't worry about that. So what makes a difference? What happens is it happens at the negotiating table, and people don't know what's going on. And this is true of, it was the same thing in Northern Ireland. I know with the peace deal there. And again, there was the posturing, and this is what we're fed, the public. But what's actually going on is something you don't know until long after. He says, and his impression, obviously, had context, was that these are solid negotiators, and they know what they're doing, and then Biden can say something, or the U.S. can say something, and Iran can say something. But there's elections coming up in America, the midterms. There's elections in Iran, and there are people, of course, in Iran who are in the leadership who are very much against this. But it's starting to look optimistic. But again, we don't know what's actually going on. But I would be surprised if it doesn't happen. I think it will. And I think Biden, obviously, as I wrote to you before, I mean, this would be such a win for him on foreign policy if he joining the Paris Accord. Yeah, that's okay. But if he manages to bring this off, and as the anti-Trump. And it would be obviously very, very good. And the whole thing about nuclear weapons. The only downside for me is he gets this big foreign policy win, and he feels encouraged to pursue this hardline China thing that we've been talking about. But no, you're very right to bring that up, because of the Iran deal. It's a very important part of U.S. foreign policy now. And Trump was wrong to do what he did, and hopefully for world peace and everything else, that there will be a successful conclusion. So that's good that you brought that up.
Yeah, Trump was incredibly irresponsible and stupid, to be frank. But I agree. I think both sides want this. Like at least parts fairly happy to see sanctions lifted, and Joe Biden obviously wants it to. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you disappeared for a while. So repeat what you said the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, I was just going to say that at least parts of the Iranian leadership probably want sanctions lifted, and also Joe Biden. For him, this is an excellent opportunity to contrast himself against Trump and appear as responsible and mature and grown up in the room. And also, if the US is withdrawing troops from the Middle East, they might want to have a better relationship with Iran. That's going to benefit them hugely in the region. So I think it's fairly important, like geopolitically, for the US to re-enter the agreement. Because if they have somewhat normal relations with Iran, if they can at least talk to each other, then they might be able to solve problems in the region without shooting rockets at each other.
Yeah.
So I think everyone stands to benefit.
Yeah, and it could impact the future of Afghanistan as well, but that's maybe too far off. But no, you're definitely right that it would be beneficial for everybody, and certainly even help things in the Middle East. So calming tensions. Well, for coming up on the hour mark, I guess maybe we should Do you have any final words you want to, what have we arrived at? We started off talking about China. What conclusions can we, would you like to make about Biden's foreign policy? Oh, summing up.
Joe Biden, do better. That's
Exactly.
my summary.
Yeah, so yeah, maybe a start and tone down the rhetoric maybe, and
Yeah.
and maybe remember the words as we're taught in grade school. You know, words have consequences. You know, if you call somebody an idiot, yeah. So be aware of the language that you use. We'll be coming back to foreign policy in a way when we talk about immigration policy, another part of the world, Mexico and South America. But we were thinking next time maybe doing something on populism, which is a rather misunderstood term. So we see it as our duty to inform people, tell people what's right. No, but to discuss that and how it relates to the current political situation. So we'll probably go back to domestic policy next time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Anders. Interesting as usual to discuss all these different things, and the whole foreign policy thing it is more difficult to discuss than domestic affairs because it's more concrete and you know what's going on. But with foreign affairs, how you have different countries involved, different actors, and half the time you don't know, what's actually going on.
Yeah, it's such a huge topic as well.
Exactly. It was so, but I'm glad we made a stab at it anyway. So we'll find cause to come back to this some other time, I'm sure. So the airplanes have stopped flying over my my apartment building. So they've obviously taken pictures and listened to this. So I will stop recording, and thanks again, Anders, and thanks people for watching and listening. Goodbye for now.